faster and with more feeling.
Oh, and Matt, you have to say Numenera, not Numenaria. If we talk about
Numenera.
Numenera again.
Numena.
Numena.
You better roll them dice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you need the wrong or right.
But let's hop into this. Hello, everybody. My name is Dungeon Master Rob, and this is...
You almost forgot your name.
I almost forgot my name, but I didn't. It's early. I remember my name. It's Rob, and I'm a Dungeon Master, and this is Dungeon Master of None.
And I'm Dungeon Master Matt, and today we have a very special guest with us, Nat from the Metamashina Podcast. Welcome to the show, Nat.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Natasha, you want to spend this time telling us about your endeavors and pitching? We'll give you another chance at the end to talk about your stuff. But yeah, tell us what you're involved in.
Sure, absolutely. I am, of course, a podcast host for Metamashina, which is a bi-weekly podcast on genre fiction from a feminine perspective. And I also have been playing D&D and dungeon mastering for about 5 years now. I've always been involved in RPGs, but I haven't really seriously laid my hand on it until now. So it's been fun.
Hell yeah. And just for all of our listeners, you should check out Metamashina. It's just a great show if you love speculative fiction, fantasy, sci-fi, and discussion thereof. It's a blast.
Matt and I are especially big fans of their recent Silmarillion episode, which you should listen to, and definitely email them about.
I'm sorry, the discussion of the Alcalabeth was not in canon. The pronunciation of Numenor and Elendil the Great was off by 3 syllables. They need to go back and translate because it's written in Sindarian, but it is the ancient Western speech. So I want them to take a look at that.
I forgot about this.
Long email.
I forgot about this when I was listening to it, and I wanted to actually tell you guys on Twitter. But I appreciated that you guys liked the dwarves and liked the dwarves' story, because I always thought that they were way more interesting and better than all the extremely
problematic
emo elves with all their fainting and dire whatever. It's just so very serious. I'm a big Tolkien dwarf fan.
Is there Gully Dwarf fanfic?
That's a
I forgot about. Did you forget about the Gully Dwarves?
I did forget about the Gully Dwarves.
Well, there is a lot of fanfic about the dwarves. I have read some, unfortunately.
I actually wrote not like the interesting kind that you guys wrote, but I definitely wrote dwarf fanfic in my early Tolkien years. There's a bunch of like dwarf stories that Tolkien never gets to that I was always like very interested in. Moria
Absolutely.
And some of their minor wars, and I absolutely wrote some fiction about that. Anyway, back on topic.
Actually, one of the first fanfics I ever read was in high school when Rob wrote one on the Blue Wizards. Do you remember sending that to me,
That
Rob?
was actually in college.
That was in college? Yeah. Oh, no. Let's pretend it was in high school.
I actually wrote that for a class. I took a Lord of the Rings as literature class, and I was encouraged to pursue that as a final something or other. Anyway, back on topic. We are here to talk about a lot of things, but the big thing that we want to talk about, and this is not news so much anymore, but just be warned that the next 20 or 30 minutes are going to contain pretty heavy spoilers for episode 26 of the second season of Critical Role. If you're online at all and you're part of the D&D community, you probably know what we're going to talk about, but just if you're still wanting to get around and watch that, go ahead and either save this episode for later or skip. We'll put the timestamps when we're done talking about it. But something pretty significant happened in that episode, and Matt and I have both watched it, but Natasha's the real expert here. So Natasha, do you want to sort of give us a rundown of what happened in that episode?
Sure, yeah. I have been watching the newest season and also catching up on the original first season, which is taking a long time, obviously, because there's 105 episodes, 4 hours each.
So
that is
many episodes.
Yeah, it's huge. But in terms of the newest episode, what happened in real life was that part of the party is lost because voice actors Laura Bailey and Travis Willingham are married in real life and have a baby. And so they lost their characters in game. Matt created a a new story arc where he had them be kidnapped by slavers and left. So the party was, of course, just the three people, and then a guest star, Ashley Birch, came on. She's playing a dwarf keg who's really awesome. And they decided that they were going to try to break them out immediately from this slaver train of about 7 enemies. And they didn't know what level they were. They didn't really know what they were getting into. They planned for quite some time in terms of setting up the scene and doing an ambush. And they had a really good plan, but they unfortunately had some horrible dice rolls. They got slammed with a 7th level Cone of Cold spell, and immediately things started to get very, very dark. Matt started telegraphing that the big bad Lorenzo was going to make an example of someone, and the people in combat at that time with him were Bo, the monk, Marisha Ray's character, and Taliesin Jaffe's character, Molly Mock. And Molly Mock was down to 4 hit points and jumped in to attack Lorenzo. Lorenzo got 2 hits on him. As a reaction, he used his Blood Maledict spell, which is a special spell that he has as a Blood Hunter class. And unfortunately, that roll for Blood Maledict, it causes damage in order to do damage or do effects. And in this case, I think he was trying to blind him. And unfortunately, he went unconscious right in front of the big bad, and Matt literally twisted the knife in, or in this case, a glaive, into him with his 2 attacks and just destroyed his character. So it was really heartbreaking to watch. It was really difficult for a lot of fans because at being part of the critter community, at least peripherally, I just got into it in April. That was really hard because Molly is one of the most beloved characters on the entire show. He's, canonically queer and very ostentatious. He's an amazing character, but he's also, unfortunately, as a mechanic, from a mechanic standpoint, is not as utilitarian as the other characters. We can go into it.
Yeah, we'll come back around to the Blood Hunter class, but it's a very much a high risk, high reward type of play style, and in this case, extremely high risk. Yeah.
Well, and there's so many things to talk about here, and I thank you for that summary, Nat. And just whether you watch Critical Role or not, this is such a great example of how to think about topics like dealing with missing players who are going to be gone for a long time, dealing with character death, good planning versus bad die rolls. Like, how do you telegraph that something is dangerous as a DM? How do you handle character death after it happens in a game? Is there such a thing as good character death versus bad character death? Just so many great topics we can talk about from both a fan and role-playing perspective. Where do we want to start?
Yeah, Matt Mercer is such a talented DM. We all agree. Matt and I have talked about this
absolutely
before. But I think just this situation is such high pressure and like so difficult to balance. And I genuinely don't know that anything could have been done better, either in terms of how to construct the scenario where 3 of your players are missing, whereas to, how to telegraph that a fight is dangerous, how to deal with character death. I genuinely, like, it, in some ways it was unsatisfying and frustrating and difficult, because anytime a character dies, that is how people are going to feel. But I genuinely don't know that this could have been done better by any dungeon master. I think it's a real, like, masterclass in how to handle some of the more oblique parts of being a dungeon master, things like how to deal with outside of game stuff in game, and how to deal with difficult situations.
So this is, I think, a reminder for all of our dungeon masters who are listening, is that the biggest thing that can affect player effectiveness at overcoming challenges, specifically combat, is the number of players, right? Anyone who's ever run a pre-made module or something that's set up to be played by 4 people, and they have 7 characters playing through it, knows that the challenges just aren't up to snuff. And so when you're used to playing with a larger number of characters, and you go down to a smaller number, it completely changes what a party is capable of doing.
Agreed.
Yeah, it's one of the difficult things is when you have sometimes the needs of the narrative come up against the actual mechanics in a very frustrating way. And one of the ways that can happen is if you have players missing right before, for example, a really critical narrative arc where you're encountering the big bad or the team of opponents for the first time. And you can't always kick that can down the road. I know that in the past, when I've had situations like this, I have tried to really heavily and unsubtly hint that, that there's a big fight coming up or a really significant moment. And that if maybe the players want to pursue some side quests or delay or spend some extra time prepping, they can do that. But sometimes your players are going to ignore that or just decide to power through anyway. And that's just something that you sort of have to try to roll with.
The way it was set up so as Nat mentioned, 2 of the players are going to be out for an extended period of time. And I think it's a great idea for a dungeon master to try and incorporate that absence into the plot, right? So as Nat said, right, it's saying that the players who are absent, their characters have been basically kidnapped, shanghaied, and controlled by this sort of evil guild of slavers. That's a great way to do it. But, that's just something you should keep in mind as a dungeon master. You've now created a pretty high stakes scenario. If your other players can't rescue those people, right, their characters, could be gone. And so it creates situations, which I think is what the dungeon master Matt Mercer wanted, where, characters are willing to fight to the death for what's going on here and really take some risks, right? Like attacking a group of people that you don't know how powerful they are.
I was just going to say that, in terms of the way that they approach this encounter, it seemed like they thought that they would be able to free them relatively quickly and then have the use of their cleric, who's, obviously one of the characters that's out. And because of the fact that, watching the first season, when Ashley Johnson's character, Pike, was the cleric in the group, and she was constantly on other work. She's usually half present for the show because of that. So I think that there was just some expectations around what the GM was going to allow that probably were a little bit overreaching in this case. And I would say that if you're going to ever go into a fight without a healer and none of your characters can heal at all, you better have a shit ton of potions and be prepared for that. So.
Especially if one of your characters does damage to themselves. I mean,
exactly.
In an ideal D&D, in an ideal 5th edition encounter, you won't take damage. If that's something that assuming that you've planned well and you've done a good job, that you won't take damage. But one of the difficult things about the Blood Hunter is that you will absolutely take damage. And one of the instructive things about this, what happened here, is that the Critical Role players are very good, but sometimes they make, like all players, make silly decisions and rush into things without planning. But this was actually well thought out and well planned, and they had a pretty good, idea of how to approach this particular encounter, and it just went south anyway. And part of that was bad rolls, and part of that was they had no way of knowing how powerful Lorenzo and his team was going to be, which again is something that is going to happen, but it didn't necessarily have to go this way, and then it did.
I think this illustrates 2 points, and the first is one in that Dungeons & Dragons, especially 5th edition, despite however well laid your plans are, a certain number of bad rolls can upset well laid plans. And if you want to play a game either as a player or run a game as a dungeon master where rolls are less significant in determining the outcome, but planning is, for example, the biggest factor in deciding whether you succeed or fail, you probably need to play a different system, right? Rob and I have talked about how Shadowrun is all about setting things up and seeing if they work or not. That would be my recommendation for, planning, determining whether you do things. And while the party in Critical Role had great strategy, right? They had a good idea for an ambush and they set it up well. Another thing to consider in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, and poor player decisions in this area can lead to things like character death, is tactics. What each character is doing round to round. And if you watch the scenario, you notice there were a couple rounds for a couple characters and that really add up where they didn't really accomplish anything, right? Because they just sort of made some bad decisions. Maybe there was a little bit of misunderstanding, but mostly they just made some bad choices and they didn't do much. And that really has a big effect in dramatic fights like this.
Yeah, not spend a couple of rounds. And again, there was a reason behind this. The idea was to get some people out of cages to potentially help with the fight, but not spend a couple of rounds failing to open the cages to some of the to some of the prisoners, and was less than effective than she might have been otherwise. And again, that's decision making that was totally justified in the moment that ended up panning out pretty poorly.
Here's the thing I want to put out to the two of you. When you are the game master or the dungeon master of a game, right? There's a certain extent that the dice decide things, and you're trying to be a neutral arbiter as possible and role play the NPCs and the environment in the way that they would act. But at a certain point, right, when a character is low, and for example, in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, when a character is unconscious, right, you as the dungeon master have to make a decision to attack someone who's down or to not attack someone who's down, right? And if you attack someone who's down, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to murder that person's character. So how do you make that decision as a dungeon master of when to do that? Because however much it's in the hands of sort of you're being neutral, at a certain point you do have to make that decision, and it's a tough one.
So this is interesting. I was thinking about this before we hopped on today. In a lot of ways, I have to admit that I kind of liked Pathfinder better, because especially when it came to character death, because it could happen if there was a particularly bad roll, or if one of your players got crit and they just took too much damage. But in 5th edition, there's a real intentionality to it as the dungeon master, because they either have to roll just absolutely catastrophically badly, and no one on their team has to be there to stabilize them, or you have to decide to intentionally do damage to them while they are down. And that both gives power to, but also places a burden on the dungeon master. And what Mercer did was absolutely 100% correct. He made it very clear what the big bad was going to do, and he was already in the process of attacking Mollymauk when Mollymauk went down. So I don't think that it is possible to set up a more justified death than this one, but it still places an awful lot of responsibility on the dungeon master, because if your player doesn't necessarily agree with that decision, then it's kind of all on you. You can't blame the dice.
Yeah, it can cause personal conflict. Absolutely. Like, I played Pathfinder mostly for the last 5 years, and that's where I've experienced character death the most as well. And,
oh yeah, hell yeah. I'll jump on that Pathfinder. I get my characters killed all the time. Mostly because I'm a moron, but sorry.
I always played healers, basically, so I kept the party alive, but dealing with the character death of people was very interesting in that game, because again, it's more of a roll of the dice thing. If you're going to drop below your constitution, you're going to die. And people know that, and in D&D 5e, you get 3 death saving throws, you get all these opportunities to be stabilized. So I don't really think that it's as easy for the DM in this case to be able to make that decision, because typically when I play with other players, or especially new players, the DM goes very light on them in terms of, okay, you're unconscious, so I'm not going to be attacking you. I'm going to switch over to the next person standing, which makes sense from kind of a story standpoint too. You're not going to go after someone that's on the ground. But in this case, like, I do think that there are situations where if you are going to increase the stakes and make it more interesting, you're going to have something, worry the corpse of your friend as they're dying.
Yeah, it really helps when you're a dungeon master is if you set up when you're in these kind of life and death combat scenarios, if you set out what the goal of the enemy is, right? Is it, a group of goblins defending their home? Is it a bunch of hungry, griffins, just trying to pick off an easy meal? Or is it an assassin that, wants to actually kill one of the characters, or like in this case, an evil, I think he's an ogre mage, slaver who's like, wants to make an example, right? If you set that up, then it feels less arbitrary as a player when the dungeon master starts attacking your dying character or your unconscious character.
Let's talk a little bit about the actual character death of the actual moment of
Yes.
Mollymauk dying, and about Natasha, can you say his name again?
Yeah, Molly Mock Tea Leaf.
No, sorry, the player. No, I didn't know his last name. Can you the player's name?
Oh, Taliesin Jaffe.
Taliesin. I always mispronounce it. And how Taliesin dealt with it. So like we said, Molly Mock is a blood hunter, does a pretty good amount of damage. It's one of Mercer's custom classes, and it's interesting. It does damage to itself to create effects, blood magic, whatnot.
So I gotta jump in here, and Matt Mercer's homebrews of the Gunslinger and the Blood Hunter are extremely popular on the DM's Guild, and they're classes with a lot of flavor, but in Dungeons and Dragons, I've always thought it's a bad mechanic. It was bad when Pathfinder did it with the Kineticist. It's bad for the Blood Hunter. In this, when one of your abilities that helps you cost your hit points. It works in some systems, but it really doesn't work in 5th edition. There are other ways to sort of balance things in the game.
Especially at lower levels. They're still at level 5, and that really limits them. I think, Taliesin took a feat to increase his hit points, but that feat could have been used to deal damage. And yeah, it's a learning process. And my conspiracy theory is that the class wasn't really working out, not with the party mechanics. And that's part of the reason why he kind of went in and sacrificed himself and is now playing a Furbolg cleric. So
Yay!
Yay for clerics.
Yay for Furbolgs.
Yeah.
So it is kind of interesting that the first character death happened to be Mercer's homebrew class, and I don't think it's like especially broken, but especially like we said, especially at low levels, there just isn't that hit point pool to really just take damage to pursue effects. Anyway, so Molly Mock goes in, Bo leaving Molly Mock alone to face this big sexy bad guy Lorenzo, who's got a glaive. And
I'll correct you on that. She actually didn't leave. She was out of range. She was on top of the wagon, and she was about to jump down and engage Lorenzo, and Molly basically jumped between the wagon to engage directly with Lorenzo.
Okay, my mistake. So
no, it's okay.
Well, no, it's not okay at all. How dare this is important stuff here. Anyway, so Molly Mock was in any case making himself a target, and which is fine. I do that all the time on all of my characters, regardless of whether or not they have any chance of surviving. And most of the time, I get lucky. But I have no shade for Molly Mock and getting up in the bad guy's face. It's my very favorite thing to do. But yeah, so Mercer has explicitly said not only that he's attacking Molly Mock, but that Lorenzo has already declared that he's making an example. So Molly Mock goes down, takes a hit, takes a second hit, and then this is very cool. Matt and I have talked about this before. Mercer gives Taliesin, just getting there. Taliesin a chance to make one final to give like one final like last word or one final act, and he spits blood in Lorenzo's face and then dies heroically. And I don't know that there is any possible better way to construct a character death. And Matt and I have talked about this. You're not always going to have the opportunity to have a heroic character death, but when possible, when justified, it is good for the DM to do so, and this was a really great opportunity. This
is a great example and something I want to talk with you all, my fellow dungeon masters, about, right? I feel like there are plenty of times in our games where we have character deaths like this, which are against a really important bad guy, and you get to say your final words. And Molly Mock's sacrifice ended up being ultimately foolhardy, but he was acting true to his character, a tiefling with very noble intentions, right? And a good heart, and he lived that in his dying. But sometimes your level 2 character, green slime that they didn't see, falls on their head and dissolves them into nothing, right? And so we have this. I think there's a false dichotomy between meaningful and not meaningful character death. Because sometimes, even in 5th edition, with all of its fancy death saves that make character death a little harder, sometimes you're going to have characters die to something that is not not epic in the storytelling thing. And what do we do with that? I want to hear everyone's thoughts on, is there really I don't think there should be a dichotomy between meaningful and non-meaningful character death.
I agree, because I think all character death is meaningful for you when you've worked really hard.
Yeah.
But I've experienced what I would call, I wouldn't say embarrassing, but sort of humiliating deaths. And I think that it can be kind of difficult for the players to rectify that. In my case, I got really, really angry because I felt like my death was sort of, I was the healer of the party, went down with one hit, unconscious. I was abandoned for the entire fight, and then my body was left to be exploded on a ship that was exploding because the rogue decided to blow it up. But nobody grabbed my body when they were escaping. Nobody did anything. And I was like, okay, I just got blown up. I'm just upset now. So, then the DM was like, okay, you can come back or you can reroll. And I'm like, I am rerolling the best healer ever. And I'm also going to make her an oracle, and she's going to be haunted by my dead character, because I was like, you're going to have to suffer.
I also feel like,
sorry, go ahead.
No, I also feel like there's not a distinction between meaningful character death and not meaningful character death. It can be undignified, especially when a higher level character, something bad happens. I was raised from the dead, but I did once sit out an entire session because I fell off a horse and took falling damage. And then died as part of the ensuing combat. But anyway,
well, think of some of our favorite fictional stories, right? Sometimes characters in an epic struggle, catch an infection and die, or are shot while sitting on the toilet, right?
Right.
But these, so I once had a character who, I was with a new group, first session, went in, died to the very first monster that was there. It was like a caller in the darkness from 3.5, and it was brutal. Killed my character on their second action of the game. And, the thing is, when you have these sort of less epic, more ignoble deaths, right? This is a cooperative storytelling game. The meaningfulness of this death is up to you, your players, and you as a dungeon master to construct some way of making that meaningful. After my character died on his second action of the campaign, the dungeon master sat with me, and we decided to come up with a fun way of that. This character died, but their soul was replaced with one of the souls in this psychic caller in the darkness, and I re-rolled a different character that had some of the same memories, but a new soul as a psychic character, and it was super great and super meaningful for my story. What do you guys think? Is it up to us to sort of make these either ignoble or embarrassing deaths meaningful, and how can we do that?
I think that one of the things that Matt did, and in terms of Critical Role, this is higher level role playing in general, but I do think you should encourage it in your players, is giving time to mourn and to reflect. Yeah. I think that's awesome because it actually makes that person feel better about their character death because it shows the influence they have on the other characters. If you have a supportive group, which we don't always have, of course, but we, as dungeon masters, it's kind of our job to encourage role play and to set up situations where they're forced to do this, of course, taking time from the game to allow for them to work through their feelings, even if they don't have any, at least try to mourn. That I think is important.
I want to circle back to Matt. I want to circle back to what you said, but I also wanted to build on what Natasha just said, because I really, again, in addition to mechanically and strategically being extremely well done by Mercer, everybody should watch this and as just like a demonstration of what really good role-playing can produce, the kind of drama and excitement and real emotion that you can have if you do a really good job of building relationships, and you do a good job of creating camaraderie on your group. Matt and I have talked about the generosity of play that Critical Role has. They do such a good job of building each other up and giving each other opportunity to shine and acknowledging each other's characters and their characters' strengths. And I think this is just such a tremendous example of what sort of like real drama and storytelling power that can produce if you do a good job with it. But I also, so to answer your question from earlier, Matt, I think it's a matter of setting expectations and a matter of explaining what type of game you're in, because you can run a 5th edition game where it is extremely unlikely that anyone will die, and that's a totally normal and justified way to play the game. But if you say, hey, look, you may get murdered, or your enemies aren't always going to pull their punches, and everybody goes in expecting that, like the Critical Role team did, then I think that you can avoid those hurt feelings and those frustrations that you might otherwise run into.
Yeah, I think Rob's point about our phrase that we like to throw around, generosity of play, it works in character death just as much as in character life, right? Giving your other players a chance to react to that death, even if it wasn't meaningful or against an important villain, can really help out the player whose character died, right? Even if your character died for nothing, right? You can see how it's shaping the story, right? If your character was left on a ship that was exploded, maybe the rogue has gone through a little bit of an arc, and they're like, I can't be so reckless, I killed my friend, right? And you as the dungeon master trying to encourage them to like react to that situation is a good opportunity.
I want to talk a little bit about the community reaction.
Yeah, let's talk more. Let's shift from role-playing game to fandom. Yeah,
and yeah, that's one of the big reasons why we wanted you on, Natasha. But also, it's a very interesting. So, of course, this is just like a really great. This is just. It's just so cool that we have these big public and popular, streaming examples of role-playing games to draw on, because it's just something that we didn't have before, and they're just so unique in terms of entertainment and storytelling, and this this moment, this entirely unplanned but incredibly dramatic, basically like high stakes improv, could just doesn't happen anywhere else. It's just totally unique to Dungeons and Dragons, and because of that, there was a strong reaction to this event. So, Natasha, do you want to talk about it from your end, and then I'll tell you what I saw a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I follow mostly on Twitter and Tumblr in itself is a cesspool of horrible reactions to things, and I follow quite a few of the artists that do a lot of, because the critter community is almost like 70% really talented artists that just draw while they're watching the game, and to see their reactions was really interesting, because I saw many that were like, I'm leaving, I can't do this anymore, it's too much for me. And then they had others that were trying to explain it from a mechanical standpoint. I tried to do that myself. I wrote a little mini-mit on it. I was like, you guys gotta understand, if you haven't really played D&D, this is what happened and this is why it happened. And I think that was the main difference there, was that the people that reacted strongly to it weren't looking at it from a game perspective. They were looking at it from a storytelling perspective. And their reaction was built on a lot of what we've experienced. I mean, I deconstruct stories all the time, but you can do some generally bad hot takes on this. And one of them that was circulating was that this was a kill your gays moment because of Molly's status and identity. And I disagree with that a lot, because I do think that, well, most of the party is gay, so that's fine. Like he's not exclusive here. But that, like when you're looking at it from the perspective of this is an improvised storyline, this is an improvised narrative, people will die, people will get hurt, people will suffer. It's not planned, and you can't hold the DM to the standard of as if they were writing this from a very planned perspective. Of course, things are planned, but you have to roll with the punches too. So, yeah, I think that now that the mourning period of 2 weeks has passed, or the refractory period, people are much better about it, especially with the new character. And yeah, I just don't send hate to people on Twitter please over character deaths.
Please do not send hate mail to anybody over anything, but especially not character death. The thing
right.
about
I'm not so much into the fandom, so I never saw any of the hate. I just saw people being like, don't send hate, and then a million retweets of like, we love you, or something like that.
Yeah, it seems like Mercer and some others got either private or immediately deleted like a lot of hate because they were commenting it on Reddit and Twitter. But most of what I saw was publicly pretty supportive. The thing about the bury your gays thing is that as I understand the trope, the problem is that they don't have agency. But in this case, Taliesin and Mollymock had absolute 100% agency.
They could have chosen to run away.
Exactly. And just because they died, like the problem isn't that the gays, well, the problem is that gays do die a lot in fiction, but the problem is that they're like used as like a plot device or not given agency in that decision. And in this case, both Taliesin and Mollymock had plenty of agency. Also,
everyone, and this is just a personal pet peeve of mine, needs to spend less time on TV tropes. They bring up important points, but like not everything's a fucking trope. And when you reduce storytelling to just this, it cheapens it.
Also, really you can't really apply TV tropes to a Dungeons and Dragons game. Anyway, so this is we often Natasha knows all about this. We talk often about toxic fandom and about how a lot of fans just feel this really, I don't know, in my opinion, creepy ownership of certain properties, and Critical Role is no exception. But I do think in general, the community was at least publicly acknowledged this as a very exciting and dramatic development, and one of the things that makes this game so great. But it was sort of disappointing to see that Mercer got any hate whatsoever for what must have been a very difficult decision. I mean, if you go back and watch that episode, it's obvious that he's trying to do his best as an actor and as a DM, but obviously like to me, it seemed obvious that he was struggling with the decision that he had to make.
Yeah, agreed. He actually is getting a tattoo of...
Is he?
Yeah.
That's so
right. He was just at SDCC, and that was part of their Talks Machina panel, which I think that was really great. Like, he's immortalizing that character because he did love it, and it was it was an important moment for him. I think the best response that I saw online was actually from Ashley Birch, who was, of course, the guest star Keg. She lost her partner a while back, and she did a really great thread about how, you're going to have these responses of anger and denial and frustration, of course, through the grieving process, but we understand and we all deal with it. And I think, and she's like, to see this epitomized in this game that means so much to people, it should be important for you, because it happens in real life. We can't just erase that or push that underneath the rug, so
death is part of the human experience.
It is. Yeah. I think that this is...
Next up, the total party wipe. The true part of the human experience.
Kill all the characters. The most important part of the human experience is when you all die and no one remembers you anymore.
Exactly.
Total, damnatio memoriae. I mangled that Latin. Please cut that out, Matt.
No, I will not.
All right. Does anybody? I mean, I could talk about this all day, but we've been going on a while. Does anybody have any final thoughts on this before we move on to our next topic?
When your character dies, you get to make a new one.
That's true. It's also it's actually kind of it's exciting. You get an opportunity to advance the narrative, to build something new. It can be very exciting. I for one am very excited to see what Taliesin's next character does, and to see how those relationships shape up.
Same.
Let's take a quick break, and we'll be back with more stuff. With Nat.
Yeah.
It's been a long day without you, my friend. And I'll tell you all about it when I see you again. We've come a long way from where we began. Oh, I'll tell you all about it when I see you again. When I see you again.
Damn, who knew?
Welcome off TV of the Fletchling and Moondrop Traveling Carnival of Curiosities. If there was ever a group of people that needed a good time to go out, have a laugh, see things that you have never seen before, and my God, take my word for it, 1 month's time, people will be buying your ale to hear the tale of what you saw at the Traveling Carnival of Curiosities this night.
How can we not talk about family when family's all that we got? Everything
Everything I went through, you were standing there by my side. And now you gon' be with me for the last ride.
It's been a long day without you, my friend.
I'm your god. Long may I reign. Eat of my fruits. I'm going to mess up my junk. What fierce?
Your job.
With blood.
When I see you again.
How can we not talk about family when family's all that we got? Everything I went through, you were standing there by my side. And now you gon' be with me.
Did we talk about on our last episode the bizarre Hasbro announcement about esports?
No, that happened after we recorded.
We should when Nat comes back do a 5-minute joke about
Okay.
that. I just
All right.
remembered that.
I do want to devote some more time to the discussion, but we should just address it.
Well, I mean we've got our idea for doing a proof of concept Roll20, have 4 parties of 4 compete in a pretty generic dungeon.
Well, so that's the
give
thing.
points on role
Again, this
playing
is
Hey guys.
Hey Natasha.
Oh, hey Nat.
We were just talking about esports and D&D esports, and how we actually had an idea for this, and at its core there's a space for competitive D&D, but whatever this dumbass Hasbro CEO is talking about is absolutely not what
For
whatever,
people
yeah.
who are not paying attention, on Jim Cramer's Mad Money, the
Wait, no, was it
suits-
really on Jim Kramer? Are
It was
you fucking
on
serious?
fucking Mad Money.
So what was Jim
Sell,
Kramer
sell.
screaming at buy Hasbro,
Yeah.
Hasbro?
Oh my god.
He was like, "We're upgrading Wizards of the Coast from sell to
maybe
don't
to-
buy." Hey, we're a don't buy.
Oh my god, what an insane
No,
thing.
and he was confused. He was talking about the new Magic the Gathering arena, which has potential to be a spectator sport, which Magic already kind of is, right?
It is.
People watch Magic
Yeah.
tournaments. He's like, oh, there's a ton of growth with that, and they were earlier talking about how Dungeons and Dragons was doing extremely well. It has its best year financially on record for the company. And then he said, yeah, we're looking into expanding Dungeons and Dragons, which is extremely popular on Twitch, which again is true, to an esport. We're going to make Dungeons and Dragons an esport. And I think he was just confusing two things. I don't think he was.
I hope he was.
But anyway, it's an important point because we're no longer going to be doing this podcast.
That's right.
Rob and I are,
Matt and I are
forming
transitioning to
an elite Twitch team. We've got a sponsorship from Cloud9 Gaming out of Poland, and we're bringing on some elite South Korean and Belarusian talent for our team, for our healer and our rogue. And we're
I love that they're trying to turn it into a PvP style thing when it's in actuality the most collaborative form of gaming that you can do.
And for the actual, the idea of competitive Dungeons and Dragons has been around a long time. At Gen Con, they had these scenarios where parties together would all play the same scenario, and it would be like a tournament, and then the dungeon masters would compare, see which party did the best. I think it was mostly in which party, killed the most monsters, but there's no reason you can't rate parties as kind of subjectively as dungeon masters to be like, well, this party did some amazing role playing and they accomplished these story goals, and you could potentially have some competitive D&D in that sort of sense of let's all play the same scenario and compare all the different outcomes.
Yeah, I've got a lot of my friends went to my current party went to the Pathfinder Con in Seattle, and they completely rocked it, did some social experimentation, because I think a lot of the old school gamers love the mechanics and the min-maxing, and my double class fighter is great or whatever, multi-class fighter and so I think they just went in and just role played the shit out of it, and completely upset a lot of games, but also had the best time of their lives, because essentially that's what you should be doing. You should be role-playing. I mean, it's a role-playing game.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Fucking disrupt those grognards.
And I think there's a way to add to add role-playing in and make it collaborative, but also still, like, I don't know, have like a rating system, or have like how good a job you did of handling particularly difficult situations. And Matt and I are hoping to maybe do something like this online or in person at some point. Stay tuned for that. But
once you recognize the subjective nature of this, then it's okay, right? I mean, figure skating is an extremely athletic sport that has a small subjective component. Things like this.
Yeah, look, if dressage can be an Olympic sport, then so can D&D.
Exactly.
Okay, so and more. Stay tuned for more about the Hamlet horny toads, or whatever our esports.
Rob.
Yeah, the devil frogs.
The moat house giant frogs.
But yeah, before we say goodbye to Natasha, we always like to get perspective on other games and talk about what we can learn from them to be better GMs and DMs. And Natasha, you have experience with something that Matt and I only have just the very basic of knowledge about, and that's the Numenera setting. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. My current one of my parties, our GM actually participated in the Kickstarter before it came out in 2013, and this system is of course developed by Monte Cook of D&D 3, right? And I GM'd a homebrew game for 2 years, and I've also run a lot of one-shots for other players as well. And it's a really fun system. It's very easy to dive into. It's perfect setting for new players or children or anybody that hasn't really done it. Or done role-playing before, because it doesn't focus on combat as much as exploration. It's set 9 billion years in the future, so magic is actual science. You can pull anything you possibly want into the game because of that. So you can have all these different exciting scenarios around that. I particularly liked incorporating space and digital technology, and it's really just so much fun and a very creative space to work in.
Right. You take the typical dungeon of that you're a place you're exploring, instead of it always being an evil wizard or an evil monster. Is this in fact a thing of nanomachines or an alien spaceship that has crashed, or mutants?
Exactly. And the character class creation is very simple. It's a matter of choosing one of 3 classes and then applying some interesting mechanics, like I am a nano that speaks to machines. That was one of my characters, and it was quite fun because then in terms of incorporating that into the game, every time you encounter something that has any nature of like AI or anything like that, like you basically are a psychic for that. So yeah, I appreciated the fact that, like, for new players, it was very fun for them to build their characters, and there's all these sort of little, what they call artifacts, oddities, and ciphers. So their system incorporates these little magical objects that you can bring into the game to enhance the experience, and also use in combat. So combat becomes quite fun when you can throw something that like displaces a thing into like the nether region or whatever. So.
And the mechanics are fairly simple, right? It's mostly just a D20 roll versus a target number, right? So it's not especially difficult to pick up when compared to some other systems, right?
Exactly. It's actually really difficult to die because you have 3 pools of like mana, HP, and then intellect, or well, that's mana, sorry. But you are drawing from these pools to lower your dice rolls. So you're putting these points in to lower the dice roll. The checks are involved on a ×3 system. So if I set a check at 5, of course you have to roll higher than a 15, but you can lower that to a 3 by putting in these points. And it makes it so that it basically you can eliminate a dice roll if you completely like put a lot of effort into it, and then you can kind of explain how that happens in the game as a GM.
I remember reading about the design of this when it first came out, and Monte Cook was frustrated with the fact that no matter whether you're just hopping a fence or trying to put a laser beam through the eye of the villain that killed your brother, right, the sort of same randomness applies, and you can't sort of direct your character's effort and go all in. And so the design of this system is like, I want to really put a lot of effort into this check, while as I want to just put minimal effort into this other one.
Exactly. And your character components are going to have things that automatically lower stuff for you as well. And you have experience points where you can do a reroll if you're given it. I think, you can see where the trajectory of this game leads into D&D 5e. And D&D 5e is a superior system, but Numenera for just learning how to do rolls and also how to lower rolls is quite good for new characters or new players.
Take that, Monte Cook.
Well, and it's interesting because, almost every role-playing system has an element of swinginess to it. And so the idea of eliminating or blunting the effect of bad or even good rolls is an interesting choice. And I see Monty's argument. There's definitely a lot of times in 5th edition when somebody who should be good at something is in that moment not good at something, and that can be very, very frustrating. And being able to control those moments definitely makes a lot of sense. Though a lot of the appeal of a role-playing system is the randomness of it and the unpredictability that the dice provide. So this is, like Natasha said, I think a good system for new players and for people who are looking for a slightly less intense, less lethal type game, and also like a less combat focused one.
For me, as someone who tried the game once and wasn't completely sold on the system, I am still, though, in love with the art and the world building that is in the world of Numenera, in that, it's just this idea of there have been, like 10 civilizations that have risen to technological supremacy and then collapsed into nothingness over this 9 billion year period. And so if you ever want to do like a post-apocalyptic kind of game, but not exactly, or just that exploration in a science fiction that you can't understand, technology beyond human comprehension, this is a perfect game to sort of teach you on how, as a dungeon master, to sort of sell that kind of idea to your players.
Yeah, and I would say that in terms of this game, there is not a lot of supplemental content for you to utilize. The book has a couple of scenarios, and there are I bought pretty much everything, including their main campaign, which is the Devil's Spine, but I ended up repurposing it and hacking it because of the fact that it was kind of broken. I had read a lot on forums about it in terms of not really working for certain kind of character mechanics, or just in terms of not having a lot of detail around how you get from point A to point B. So, I mean, in terms of DMing this, it's a lot of prep because it's a sandbox world. So there's a lot of areas, and you're going to have characters that want to go wherever they want to go. And yeah, it's intense. It's a much more storytelling based game where you're going to want to leave options open for characters, have scenarios ready to go, and improvise quite a bit.
It's interesting because this idea of a sort of fantastic or fantasy type world that takes place like post technology is relatively well represented in fiction, going back a while. I mean, spoilers. Wheel of Time has this conceit, and the Lies of Locke-Lamora a little bit, and I think Shannara and a bunch of other settings have this idea of being.
It's as Isaac Asimov said: technology of a sufficiently high level is indistinguishable from magic.
Actually, that was Arthur C. Clarke.
Yeah, it's Arthur C. Clarke. It's actually in the intro to the book because They were
Stupid
explicitly going for that.
fake nerd, Matt. Anyway, so this is, I think, filling in a need in terms of both setting and theme. I think Numenera really like scratches an interesting, or scratches an itch that isn't filled very well by 5th edition. Or by the standard Forgotten Realms setting in the first place. So I'm a big fan, and this is, Matt and I are always talking about, steal aggressively from things. This is a great setting to grab and borrow ideas from, and it's pretty easy, I think, to borrow some of the tech or the artifacts or just some of the themes and settings and plug them in.
Or just the idea of a sentient cloud of nanomachines in a crashed spaceship. If you put that into your D&D game, you're going to wow your players.
Yeah,
absolutely. Always incorporate nanotechnology because it is fucking terrifying.
It's so scary. Yeah. Which sort of brings me to the question that we are always trying to ask, and Natasha, I want to give you the opportunity to answer this. But what if you're a 5th edition DM and you're looking to borrow ideas or themes from Numenera, what do you think the best like takeaways are in terms of either just mechanics or concepts or ideas or settings or whatever?
I think the investigative nature of the game and exploratory nature of the game is really important. I think a lot of the time when you do dungeon crawls in D&D 5e, you're just going through and murdering things, and you might be doing some figuring out of what's happening, but you're not really looking at the bigger picture. Usually you're just kind of in the moment. There's a combat, there's maybe finding something, but the way that Numenera works, it encourages you to figure out things and to have these sort of almost puzzles around a larger story. So they're like Twilight Zone episodes in what's going on. Like if you're exploring some relic in the in the desert, how did it get there? Why is it there? What age does it come from? And is it hostile, or is it an intelligent being that needs to be saved from itself? Like that to me provides a lot more emotion in the storytelling and the role playing. And I think encouraging that in games in general is really important because we don't all need to be murder hobos all the time. We can obviously, like, part of the appeal of D&D is getting that really cool magical item that you can use for the rest of the campaign, and Numenera really supports that.
Strong agree. Well, Natasha, thank you so much for coming on our podcast. Like we said at the beginning, we're Dungeon Master of None. If you have questions about this or comments, you can email us at dmofnone@gmail.com.
And if people are interested, Natasha, in following your own work and your own podcast,
I was going to get to that, Matt. Come on. I was going to get to that. I was going to finish our introduction.
Going straight to the end.
And I was going to let her close with her stuff. So at dmofnone.com, Natasha,
we're a great team, Robin.
We do a good job of communicating with each other ahead of time about what we're going to do. Natasha, do you want to talk about where you're from and where you're at and people can find you online?
Yeah, you can find me at Ashes for Foxes on Twitter, and also my podcast, Metamashina, that's spelled Metamashina. We have a website, we're on iTunes and SoundCloud, all the good things. Like you guys said, we did talk about the Silmarillion. If you are a pedantic nerd who really, really wants to get into the dry texts of things, don't listen to us because we spent our whole podcast on that, talking about whether we would fuck Sauron or Melkor. That's kind of our thing. We talk a lot about monster husbands, and
Sauron. Come on, yeah.
We're thirsty for Sauron, for
Definitely
sure.
Sauron.
Yeah, he is much cooler. He can turn into a werewolf, a vampire. He's a hot elf in some iterations. So yeah. Anyway.
Hey, I like him, and I want him to put a ring on me.
Yes,
that's right. All right. So yeah, thank you again for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Head over to Metamashina, give them a subscribe, leave them a rating and review, and, if you've got a second after listening to this episode, leave us a rating or a review. We'd really appreciate it. It helps other people find the show.
Thanks, everyone, for listening, and keep rolling them dice.
Good job.
I'm